Hi everybody, greetings from what is a bit of a chilly afternoon here in Cape Town today. I'd have to say thank you so much for all the kind comments on the last video that we posted. I had no idea that my motorcycle experiences, such as they are, would be of any interest to anyone. So thank you again. And in view of that, I thought, well, maybe we could slip in another little video before we get back to our series on Rhodesian history. So, folks, if you'll join me again, we'll go down memory lane. If you lived in Salisbury in the early 1960s and you rode a motorcycle, well, there weren't that many places you could go to for spares and for service. If you had an Italian machine, like a Gilera or a Ducati, well, you'd go along to TT Motorcycles up in Pioneer Street. But if you were a guy that liked his Triumphs, or maybe the AJS and the Matchless Singles, M&S Motorcycles was the place for you. Forbes Avenue, just off Kingsway. And if you had a nondescript means of transport, like maybe an unusual scooter or a bike that nobody else would touch, well, you could go along to Armando Maza. And if I remember correctly, he was up in Sonoya Street. But if you had a BSA and you just couldn't find parts for it, okay, then you would ease your way over to Amed's Motorcycles. Now, Ahmed's workshop was just off Charter Road in a little side street, and he would fix you up, if not straight away, a bit later. And it was a bit of a mystery to folk how he was able to do this. And of course, the rumors were fast and furious concerning Amed. You know, if you had a 500cc AMC machine, or as I said, a BSA twin, you'd go to him. And if you were a sort of a thinking man, you'd say to yourself, you know, this is a great coincidence that Amed can find these spares when the agents don't have them, and he can find them within hours, as it were, if he doesn't have them in stock. And isn't it strange that it just happens that these particular models that he can help you with are the very same sort of machines that the British South Africa police have? And so if you were a guy that could put two and two together, you'd naturally come to the conclusion that, look, there's somebody at CMED there that Amed knows very, very well. Well, look, that was just a rumor, and I'm not telling you this for a fact, but that was the kind of place that Amed ran. Now, if you wanted to get a genuine BSA part, okay, you'd go to the agents, Johnson's Motorcycles in Cameron Street. Now, they'd fix you up. Now, it so happened that I had a Shooting Star BSA. And I bought this from Umtali Used Cars. And when I first saw it, I have to tell you that it wasn't love at first sight by any means. I looked at this bike, A7 Shooting Star. That was its official designation. And £50 was the asking price. It was about 6 years old at the time, so it wasn't a very old bike, but it looked like it was 60 years old. There's only one word to describe it: battered. It seemed to have dents everywhere, in the mudguards, in the tank, in the oil tank, in the toolbox on the other side of the bike. Wherever you looked, the silencers had dents in them. The downpipes had dents in them. It just seemed like this thing must have been tumbled down the side of a mountain. And so I stood there looking at it, and I'm trying to think to myself, man, is this really something I want to own? When the salesman speaks to me and he tells me what a great bike this is, but he can see I'm not convinced, eh? But he knows it's touch and go. I might take it or I might not. And he's not going to let me walk out of there without putting up a fight. And so he says to me, do you know, sir, that this motorcycle is the very motorcycle that went from Umtali to Beira in 2.5 hours? Yeah. So I look at the bike and I look at him and I'm thinking, man, I don't know whether you're lying to me or whether, you know, that is a really fantastic time or whether that's a slow time or what. I mean, I have no idea. I haven't ridden a motorbike from Umtali to Beira and I've got no idea what the condition of the roads were at that time. So I said, is it? He said, yeah. He said, but I tell you what, I'll let you have this motorcycle with no deposit and, shall we say, £10 a month. And if the £10 is too much for you, I'm quite happy to come down to, say, £7.50. You'll never get a better bargain. And so I buy this shooting star. And it becomes directly responsible for me losing my job that I had at that time. But that's another story and I won't go into that now. So I ride this shooting star all the way back to Salisbury from Umtali. And let me tell you, that was nearly a 2.5 hour ride. Shouldn't have taken that long by any means. But this bike was terrible. As soon as it got to above, say, 60 miles an hour, it started really shaking as though it was going to fall to pieces. As a matter of fact, as I drove into my yard in Central Avenue, the main chain just gave way and, you know, sort of fell limply behind me on the road, and there I coasted to a stop at my front gate. So yeah, I go off to Johnson's Motorcycles, and I need a few things for this bike. This bike is in really bad nick. So I see as I get there, I become aware of the fact that they're looking for a mechanic. So I think, well, I haven't got a job. It's a bit of a chance, but I'll try my luck. So I asked to speak to Mr. Arthur Johnson, who's the owner. And the old man comes out of the workshop, you know, wiping his hands on a piece of cloth. Yeah, can I help you? He says. I said, I believe you're looking for a motorcycle mechanic. Do you know anything about bikes? Oh, well, yeah, you know, I can learn. You know, I'm a quick learner. Do you know anything about motorbikes? Well, yeah, some, sir. Do you know anything about road racing? Well, yeah, I read up a little bit about it now and then. Do you know anything about local racing? Yeah. Tell me everything you know about Richie Gardner. Richie Gardner? Who's Richie Gardner? I said, I don't know too much about him, sir. He says, you don't know too much about him? He's the fastest dirt track racer that we have here in the country, and you know, you don't know anything about him. What else can you tell me about motorbikes? I said, well, I have a bike of my own. Oh, you do? Where is it? It's parked on the pavement, sir. Let's take a look. We go out there. Now, I didn't think that this bike would form part of a job interview, but the old man looks at it. Eh? Now, Arthur Johnson is no pushover. This guy is direct. There's no beating around the bush. He says it like it is. And he's got a bit of a volcanic temper, you know, which he doesn't always display. He keeps it well under control, but when he's had enough, boy, everybody knows about it. Now, just prior to that, to me rocking up there, you know, and this was like a couple of months before, he got so angry that he fired everybody that worked for him. Everybody, instantaneously. Get out of here. Get out of my sight. You're fired, the lot of you. So the old man's left standing alone there in the workshop, and he finishes doing what he does, and he locks up at the end of the day. Now, his manager was a very nice guy by the name of Curly Elliott. So Curly's now sitting at home and he's got no job. And Curly's from Bulawayo. So he wants to go back there the next day, but he's got a problem. He needs to fix his bike up. So he has no choice. He's got to go to Johnson's Motorcycles the next morning. So Curly tells me he pitches up there, but it's not at opening time. It's like halfway through the morning, and the place is silent. Now, there's a bell on the counter. Ding! He rings it. The old man comes out of the workshop. Why are you late? Sir, he says, get onto the phone, get hold of the other guys and tell them that I'm not going to wait much longer for them. If they're not here, they're going to be really fired. So, yes, sir, yes, sir. So Curly jumps into gear, and it's not long before the blokes pitch up there one by one, and business is back to normal. Yeah, so that's the kind of guy that Arthur Johnson was. So he looks at this shooting star, and I think, man, I better say something here, because it looks to me like this interview is going to come to an end pretty soon, and it's not going to be a very positive result for me. So, you know, the old man's been talking about racing, so he'll be interested to know this. I said, well, you know, this bike is it's got quite a reputation, sir. It went from Mtali to Beira in 2.5 hours. He looks at me. Now he's got these blue eyes, very, very pale. And they kind of like, he's an old man, so they kind of sunk back in his sockets. And he stares at me. Now, I don't know what he's thinking. Is he thinking, don't play the fool with me? Or, man, that's great. I don't know. His features are inscrutable. So he says, I'll let you know. He turns on his heel and goes. Well, yeah, I get a call. I'd hardly got home when the phone rang. And it's Curly, and he says, can you start tomorrow? Yeah, motor mechanic. So I get there, but no, I'm not a motor mechanic. The old man's decided he doesn't want me in the workshop, but he'll have me in the spare parts department. So I'm happy enough to have that. You know, it's a job. And besides, it's quite an exciting place in many respects. So guys come in and out there, and they're after spares, and Curly is showing me how to open up the spare parts manuals and how to look for the parts that the guys want, and then to go into the store and where to find them. And I think I'm settling in okay. But it's a nice place, man. It's the kind of place where you got to work with your lumber jacket on, and you know, guys come in there. Ray Richards often used to come in there, and I struck up a bit of a friendship with him. I really liked this guy, you know, and he was a very good racer. Hey? So Ray would rock up there, and he'd sit down on one of the bikes in the showroom, and I'd stand there nattering to him, you know, if there was nothing else to do. And Saturday afternoons, you know, when the place locks up at 12 o'clock, guys used to come on their bikes, just park outside Johnson's, and you know, they'd have a couple of cokes with them and sit down there, and we'd all talk, and you know, guys would smoke a few cigarettes, and you know, eventually we'd all disperse. But it was like a kind of a little gathering on Saturday afternoons that one looked forward to. So it was a nice place, man. And Arthur Johnson, he was an ex-racer himself, you know, of some note, and very much an enthusiast. And you know, guys could phone him any time of the night, as it were, and he'd open up the shop and you know, provide them with parts, because motor racing was a big thing in Rhodesia, and in Salisbury, Arthur Johnson was a big name in the racing game. So yeah, I kind of got my you know, my wits about me, and Amed walks in. Now Curly had warned me about him, and he said, be careful with Amed, because he's a bit of a shady character, and he'll try and push you for a discount, but you don't give him a discount because he's not a member of the Motor Traders Association. So, okay, fine. So I meet Amed, and he's after some parts, and I write it up for him, and he looks at it, and he looks at me, and I can see he's thinking, oh, there's a new guy, you know. He said, by the way, I'm Ahmed, you know, Ahmed's Motorcycles. Yeah, yes, sir. I see you haven't given me a discount. And no, sir, I'm afraid you have to be a member of the Motor Traders Association. Oh, so you can't give me a discount? No, I'm sorry, man. I don't know if I got enough cash with me, man. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Okay, let me see. Pays for the parts and he goes. Now, I have to just tell you something about my shooting star. As I said, it was really battered. Now, something must have happened to it. It must have ended up in quite a few pieces. And somebody, some previous owner, put the thing together, but there's like a lot of bits missing here and there. You know, the headlamp is supposed to have a cowl over it. That's gone. Somebody's welded some awful looking brackets onto the covers that go on the stanchions, and painted them with a brush, and you can see the the brush marks on there. But the worst is the electrics. The headlamp has now been connected to a domestic household switch, and this thing is kind of like screwed onto the onto one of the brackets that hold the headlamp, and it looks bad. I mean, it really looked bad. And but the worst thing of all was that there was no air filter. Well, that's okay. There was just the open hole there on the carburetor, sucking in sand and dust and whatever else happened to be around. No air filter. But that, one can still live with that, eh? The bike will still run for a time. But between the carburetor and the cylinder head is a very important component called a drip shield. Now, what this does is, if the carburetor should just happen to leak a little bit, you know, then any excess fuel will go down along this drip shield and be diverted away from the magneto. Because right underneath the carburetor, you know, like about 6 inches below it, is this magneto with a HD pickups over there. And if you've got any wandering sparks and petrol fumes or neat petrol around the place, well, you're asking for trouble. Now, this was the situation with the shooting star. Every now and then, when I started up, woof, it would burst into flames. Now, my old man said to me, hey, you better be careful with this bike. What you do is don't run away with it when it does that. Just keep calm and just kick it over a few times until it starts, and then it'll suck all it'll suck everything into the engine and extinguish the fire. Oh, but you know, that didn't always work. Maybe if you've got a single and you know, the mouth of the carb is near where the fire is, yeah, you could probably do that. But it didn't work very well with this BSA twin. So I often found myself having to take my gauntlets or rapidly pull a hanky out of my pocket and try and dab away at the flames. And luckily, it never got any worse than that. But it was always a dramatic incident when this sort of thing happened. And you know, very spectacular. Any bystanders would ooh and ah, and they'd certainly take note. You couldn't ignore it. So my shooting star used to do this sometimes. Now, I had a habit of parking it on the pavement outside Johnson's, and there are these big windows, you know, which if you're outside you can look in and see the bikes in the showroom. And of course, if you're inside the showroom and you look out, you can see everything. So when I start my bike up, if there's somebody inside the shop and this thing catches fire, it always created a bit of a stir. And Curly came out a couple of times, you know, and he said, "You got to do something about this bike, eh, before you set this whole building on fire." And Mr. Johnson didn't approve of it either, you know. And eventually I was told, "You better sort this thing out." Well, there was, you know, I'd been unemployed for a while and I didn't have any money. And, you know, quite frankly, I'm not complaining, but I didn't earn a lot there, you know, not really. So there was no question of rebuilding this motorbike or even buying another one. And then this one day, it's going home time, and if I remember correctly, I'd asked to go home a little bit earlier, so there were customers in the shop. Curly was there, old man Johnson was still there, and I prod the Kickstarter on the pavement of my shooting star, and this time he doesn't want to fire up. So of course I kick and I kick, but in the process, more and more fuel is dripping out of this carburetor onto the magneto, and then woof, there was fire. So I jump back and the bike falls over onto its side, and you know, it looks like there's going to be a braai on the pavement, and it's and I've got my hanky and I'm dabbing away, and somebody comes running with a fire extinguisher, but luckily they didn't have to use it, you know. I managed to extinguish the flames, picked the bike upright, switched off the petrol tap, stood there with my heart beating, and then Curly stood there watching the slot, and then he said, "Can I have a word with you? You better do something about this." He said, "I'm not joking." He said, "This is a very bad example for any of our customers to think that somebody that's employed here is riding something like this. It's not becoming of someone who's in the industry. So you better do something about this. And another thing, don't park it on the pavement again. Yeah, go park it down the road. Old man doesn't want to see it near the building." So yeah, you know, I lost one job because of that bike, and I'm smart enough to know that if I do nothing about this, I'm going to lose this job too. So the next day I count the pennies in my pocket, and I try and work out how much I got, and I look in the spare parts manual for a drip shield, and I find it, and the price is 18 shillings and sixpence. I go look on the shelf, nothing, out of stock. Where can I get a drip shield? Amed's, it's the only place. So after work, I walk down the road a little way, about 2 or 3 addresses down the road. There I find my my shooting star, and I start her up, and I go off to Amed's. Now, I don't know, some of you folk may remember Amed's motorcycles, but it seemed to me that whenever I walked in there, there was always a lot of women standing behind the counter. Now, I don't know who they were. Probably his sisters and his cousins and his aunts or his wives, I don't know. But there was always a group of silent women doing nothing. And their sole function seemed to be, when somebody walked in through the door, was to shout, "Amed!" And Amed would come hurrying through from the back. And so it was this particular day. When you walk in through the front door, it's a kind of a gloomy place, eh? It's not lit up brightly with nice posters and, you know, bikes standing gleaming on the floor, and no, it's nothing like that. You walk in, pretty much an empty room. On your right hand side is a door. If it's open and you look through it, you'll see a patch of open ground with motorbikes standing there sort of at random in various stages of disassembly, with weeds and grass growing amongst them. That's his spare parts store. Then there's the counter, and behind the counter is a door, and behind that door I never found out what was there. So Amed comes through, and he recognizes me straight away. "Yeah, this is the guy that didn't want to give me the discount. Can I help you, sir?" I said, "I'm looking for a drip shield for a BSA." "Ah," he said, "yeah, I've got one." I said, "How much?" "Ah, for you, not much. Special price for you, sir." "Okay, sounds good. 18 and 6 at Johnson's if they had one. Maybe I can get one from Amed even cheaper." So Amed goes the back over there, and he comes out with a brand new drip shield. And he says, "Yep, there you are, sir. How much, Amed?" £1.10. £1.10. So he can see by my face that I'm a bit taken aback at this. I mean, that's what, 12 and 6 more than I expected to pay. I said, that's a lot of money. So he said, well, you know, we got a rule here. I said, is it? He said, yeah, it's called take it or leave it. Ah, man, what am I going to do? So I got to weigh up my job against the £1.10, and I give him £1.10, and I walk out there. But I know, you know, he's really taken me for a ride, and I'm kind of a little bit resentful, and I'm thinking to myself, why didn't I get a friend of mine to go there and buy it on my behalf? I never thought Amed would actually hold a grudge like this. But anyway, I take this thing home, and that night I put it on the bike, and you know, there it is. I can't do anything more. So a few weeks go by, and who should walk in there through our front door at Johnson's Motorcycles? It's Amed. He says, can you help me, my friend? I've got a big emergency on my hand. I need some nuts. Now, motorcycles in those days used to have a special nuts, okay, with a thread, and it was called BSC, British Standard Cycle, 26 threads per inch. You can't get anything else like it, eh? And the reason was because in the old days, you know, motorbikes were quite rough, and they vibrated a lot, and it was found that this was the right type of thread. Once you tighten it, it doesn't vibrate loose. So you can't put anything else on there. You know, okay, quarter BSF, quarter cycle, those are interchangeable. You can get away with it. But all the other sizes, no ways. And it's not something that is used on motor cars or on machines or anything. It's purely used on motorcycles. So Amed is stuck, and he needs these, and he hasn't got any, and presumably they don't have any spare at CMED either. But I got stock. So yeah, how many do you want? Can you spare 20 5/16ths, 20 3/8ths? Yeah, no problem, Amed, for you anytime. Count them out on the counter, and he says, how much? So I double the price. He doesn't know that. I tell him it's going to cost you so much. And he looks at me in surprise. He says, I've never paid so much for these. Can you check the price again? I said, no, that's the price. So he said, no, it can't be, man. Do me a favor, check again. I said, I'm telling you, Amed, this is the price. And, you know, it's take it or leave it. I could see on his face, he thought, yeah, you're screwing me, eh? But more to the point, he knew why I was screwing him. And I got a lot of satisfaction out of that. And he had a cough up. So he paid. Now, we had a kind of a cash register on the counter, but not the sort of cash register you know, that would spring to mind when I say that. This was a kind of a square box with an opening on the top, and what happened was there would be a roll of paper, a roll of carbon paper, and then a printed roll, which would be the top copy, and there'd be a big lever on the side. So you'd write through this opening, you know, whatever it was. 1 Lucas PUZ 7E battery, £3, 2 shillings and 6pence. And you pull this lever, and then the top copy comes out, and you tear it off, and you give it to the customer. When you pull the lever, the drawer also opens, and there's all your change there. So you know, this is how it's done. So I give Amed his top copy and his nuts, and he gives me the money, and he sort of wanders off almost forlornly off back to his workshop. Now at the end of the day, the idea is, you know how much your float was when you started the day, and you know how much there is at the end of the day when you count what's in the till, and the difference between the two is clearly what you've sold. But if there was a problem and you wanted to check it, then you would open up this cash register and you would take out the copy beneath the carbon, and then you could see each individual one. Now, there was something wrong that day. I don't know what it was. Curly was struggling. The old man wanted a lockup. Eventually, he came through. And what's the problem? So, he's trying to balance the till here. So the old man goes through these invoices one by one. He might be old, but I tell you, he's got a mind like an accountant. Doesn't have to, well, there's no calculators in those days, He doesn't even have to write down the figures and add them up. He can just go through and sort of like add it in his mind. And he stops when he sees this copy of Amed's invoice. He looks at this. Who wrote this out? Curly shakes his head. I said, oh, I did, sir. What's the price of a 5/16 BSc nut? I tell him. And a 3/8? I tell him. What's this thing? So I said, well, you see, Mr. Johnson, and I tell him the sad story that I've told you now. So the old man stares at me and he says, you know what? We also got a rule here. Yes, sir. And our rule is that we treat people the way that we want them to treat us. Is this how you want to be treated? So I said, no, sir. He's right. Now you write out a new invoice, okay, when we finish here. And you work out the difference. And you go to Amed now, before you go home. And don't let me phone him to find out if you've been there. You go there, and you give him his money back, and you apologize. Do you hear me? Yeah. And don't do it again. Yes, sir. So I go off to Amed. And I'm feeling, this is a lot of bother I've got myself into here. So I walk in there. There's the woman. Amed! Amed comes. He doesn't smile when he sees me because, he knows that I've overcharged him during the day. And so, he's not being very friendly. The body language is not good. So I said, Amed, I've come to apologize. So, I said, yeah, I think I may have made a mistake with the nuts. I brought you a new invoice and your change. So I put it on the counter and I give it to him. And he looks at this, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and I look at the woman, and the woman, they don't say a word. So he says, thank you. Okay, good night, I say. I turn to my heel and I walk to the door. Just a minute. So I turn around. He says, I think I may have made a mistake with that drip shield. Hang on a minute. So he fishes around in the drawer there, and he gives me a 10 shilling note. So, okay, it still wasn't 18 and 6, but I mean, it was a good gesture. So I said, thank you very, very much. So I put it in my pocket, and I thought, well, I think the day's ended okay. At least I've got some money in my pocket. I got my drip shield. And the old man taught me a good lesson today. So, yeah, I had the opportunity of learning an awful lot from Arthur Johnson. He was a very good man to me, I think. And although he was a crusty old guy, and it was best to keep on the right side of him, he also taught me a lot. And so today the shooting star has disappeared long ago. It got to the point where I sort of like gave up any hope of that thing ever being a decent motorbike to own. And so I said to my friend John Elbury, I think I must find a buyer for my bike. And he said, my brother's looking for a 500 twin. I'll speak to him. So Mike Elbury rocks up at my home one evening. Now I knew he was coming, and I thought I better try and tidy this bike up a little. But man, whatever you did, it just didn't seem to, you could wash it and try and polish it. It seemed to make it look worse, you know. But there was a problem with the primary chain on it. It had stretched, but only in one spot. And the problem was trying to adjust it. So if you adjusted it, you'd still hear it rattling, clack, 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 clack. Then it seems like you adjusted just a little bit more, and then it's too tight. When the tight part, the unworn part of the chain, as it were, the unstretched part, is between the two sprockets. I mean, then there's a little bit of a whine. And I struggled with this thing. I struggled. In the end, I gave it up. I said, well, if Mike takes it, he takes it. If he doesn't take it, he doesn't take it. I can't help it. So Mike, of course, wants to hear the bike running. So I started up, and there's no rattle from the chain, but there is a bit of a whine. Oh, switch off, he says, switch off. What's that? I said, it's the primary chain, man. I just can't get the thing right. So he says, this bike is in shocking condition. I said, I know, man. I said, that's why I want to sell it. So I said, if I was going to use this on the road, I'd never buy it. He said, but I want to put it on the racetrack. So what do you want for it? So I paid 50 for it. I wonder if I can get 50 again. So I said, £50. Yeah, okay. So he bought it. And I have searched on my computer and I can't find it. But somewhere I have a copy of a program of a race meeting at Marlborough Racetrack. And it lists all the bikes that were competing that day. And there was Mike Elbury 500cc BSA. So the bike that went from Umtali to Beira in 2.5 hours and could barely get me to work and back every day, finally found a home on the racetrack, and under the magic fingers of Mike Elbury, it was restored to its previous performance. And I'm happy to say that I think he did reasonably well with it, if I can remember correctly. Yeah, the Flaming Star. Treat others the way you want them to treat you, and not the way they treat you, eh? Well, there we have it. That's about it. You know, when I talk of these things, they seem to me to have occurred just yesterday. And yet, when I stop and think about it, and I realize that, look, this is over half a century ago that these things took place, it's always a little bit of a jolt to realize just how quickly time flies by. Anyway, it is what it is. So, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I trust that you're well. Take care. Look after yourselves. God bless you. Thank you for spending time with me this afternoon. And cheers for now.